Welcome to the For the Love of Language podcast. I'm EJ.
And I'm Stacy, and it's been a while
It has been a
since
while.
we've recorded anyway.
That's true. We took a little bit of a recording break over the summer and just had a bunch of pre-recorded ones that we released, but we are back
We're
and we are super
back.
excited to be back and to nerd out today.
Yes, yes. We decided that today we're going to talk about numbers. A very fascinating topic that should be fun, an intersection of mathematics and language.
But don't worry, as we're gonna keep it approachable, keep it understandable
I'm not a
for
mathematician,
everyone.
guys. I'm a fucking linguist. I didn't take anything beyond college algebra and a shit ton of statistics. I know I can talk about statistics, but we're talking about like numbers as a language concept, not as a mathematical one.
Exactly. And as a language concept, there's a lot of interesting stuff about numbers, even when it just comes to basic counting to 20.
Oh yeah.
So,
Yeah, like anybody who's studied any other language will tell you that it is like that's one of the first things you learn when you approach a new language system is how to count or like which numbers to use and then like what base that language uses, right? So like
yes.
English uses a base 10. So you have all 1 through 10 and then everything kind of builds from there. And so then you have like 10 and then 20 and 30 and so everything moves in chunks of 10. But it's different in other languages. Like French, for example, is like partially 10 based, but it's also partially 20 based. It's also got like a base 20.
Exactly. And even in English, we normally use a base 10 system, but when it comes to time, we use a 12-hour day and 60 minutes. And
Yeah.
so you could argue that in some units of measurement or like 12 inches to a foot, we're not actually using a base 10 system for all of it. We are for parts of it, but not all of it, which is super interesting. And actually, that same thing happens with time in a lot of languages. And actually,
Yeah.
time is one where you can see different countries doing it differently. Like in English, we'll say it's 5 past 10 or 5 to 10. In other languages, you'll say if it's 9:30, you might call it half 10.
Yeah.
And in some languages, you'll use 20-minute increments more often. So there's just some interesting things when it comes to how we've all come to use numbers.
Yeah, it is. It is very interesting. And I mean, I feel like we should have an entire other episode about time in and of itself, just because it kind of connects back to our most popular episode, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis of like, how do people talk about time and how do people perceive time and how is time like discussed linguistically and how does that like affect people's approach to time. So like time in and of itself is like a very fascinating subject, but if we're just talking about numbers, we're talking about like we covered kind of like the base stuff, but I also wanted to share just like a weird fun number fact that I learned from a little linguistic exploration on my Twitch channel that we did. So for those who don't know, Stacy the linguist, hi, that's me. I also stream on Twitch, and sometimes we do educational streams on Twitch, and we'll do something called language roulette, where we'll spin a wheel, and on that wheel, there's a bunch of like understudied or underrepresented languages, and we'll do a little bit of a deep dive into understanding what those languages are. And there's a separate branch of Germanic language that's called like Alemannic German, and there's like some other language families that are kind of built in there, but one of the varieties of this type of Germanic language is really kind of cool because the first three numbers, so number 1, number 2, and number 3, have 3 different genders. So when you're counting something, you have to account for the number and the gender of it. So if I were to say like I have 2 phones and phone happened to be like male, then I would have to choose the masculine version of the number 2. But there are 3 genders to choose from, but only for the first 3 numbers. So there's
Interesting.
masculine, feminine, neutral for the number 1, 2, and 3. numbers
That's
one, two, and three.
interesting. Russian actually does something similar where like the numbers 1 and 2 specifically are gendered masculine, feminine, neuter, and you can also with like especially with the number 1, you can also change the case of it, which is kind of interesting.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, tell us more about like what kind of case options you have for the number one. And let's talk about let's clarify what case is for people first.
Okay, yeah. So in English, we use syntax or word order to determine like what is the actor, what is a recipient, what is, the object of an action. We do
Mm-hmm.
that all with word order. In Russian, you can change the order of the words around. And so in order to know who is the actor and what roles, what semantic roles the different items in a sentence are playing, you use case, and that's in Russian, you just change the ending of a word. So, for example, the word woman in Russian is zhenshina, and that would be the nominative case or the case that you use when it's a subject. But when a woman is an object of a sentence, then that changes to zhenshinu. Or if the woman is the indirect object, so something is being given to a woman, it becomes zhenshinye
Mm-hmm.
with the ye at the end instead of the a or the u. And so that's kind of how case works. So with the number 1 in Russian, you can have adin would be just the normal subject male version. Adna would be the female version, and adno would be the neuter version.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you take the feminine version of that, adna, you can then change that to be accusative, to be the object of the sentence, and then it can become adnu.
Mm.
And so you can just kind of hear the vowel at the end of the word changing.
Yeah. So when you're using a number as an accusative, can you
Mm-hmm.
give an example of what that sounds like? Is that similar to kind of like the one might do this, like it using one in that sense in
So
English?
if you said one is going to do something, then that would be nominative, like it would be the subject.
Right,
But if you
right.
were to say like, I love one dog,
Ah,
and this is like a
yes.
very contrived and unnatural example, but if I were to say I love one dog, then
I mean, it's possible that you only love one dog. I mean, it's hard for us to believe because we both love dogs, but there could be only
right.
one dog in the world that you love.
Exactly. But if I was just going to say one dog as like something that exists, like the normal unchanged form would be adna sabaka. But
Mm,
if I were to change that to I love one dog, it would be adnu sabaku.
mm,
And
hmm.
so you would then change it. So it
Interesting.
gets very like numbers in Russian actually get really interesting and
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
So
So is that only with the number one?
so like the number 2 has a feminine version, but other than
Mm-hmm.
that, it does actually change. Like the genitive plural for two instead of dva or dvie would be dvuch.
Mm,
So you do have them, but it's just I think the word one I tend to notice more possible changes with
okay.
than some of the other numbers. But yeah,
Yeah.
like most of them you do actually change. It just that one seems relatively obvious compared to the other ones, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's just really interesting, and I press this just because it's fascinating how those like first three numbers, one, two, and three, those are like just like the most important numbers for people, so they tend to be like highly, highly marked. And when we say
Mm,
marked, for those who are unaware of how that is being like used in the world of like linguistics, when something is marked, that means it's usually got a lot more details to it. It can be like broken down in more ways. It's more specific. It's different. It's noticeable. It's
mm-hmm.
like it's not. It doesn't follow a pattern. It's kind of it stands out.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting how like all of humanity is like, yeah, the numbers one and two, and for some people three are like super important, and so therefore have like more specificity to it. Like another
Right.
example is if we're just talking about like grammatical number of just talking about like how many things are there when we're referencing stuff. Arabic is notorious for having an entire different form of conjugation, specifically to talk about whether two or more people are being discussed. And it's like, so it's not just one person, and it's not like a lot of people.
Mm.
Two people in particular are like involved in this situation, and there's like a specific conjugation for that. So it's really interesting that like the numbers 1, 2, and 3 kind of come up as being like, these are the big guys.
Yeah, for that, actually, that's really interesting. And I think 1 and 2 maybe stand out to me most in Russian just because I think you use those more than other numbers, most likely in daily speech. But when you're looking at software localization, because that's something I'm a little bit more familiar with, handling foreign number systems is actually really complicated because, like you just mentioned, with, in English, there's really only 2 kinds of pluralization. Like we have singular and we have plural, and 0 actually falls into the plural camp. Like I have no dogs, I have 0 dogs. Like dogs is plural. You don't say I have 0 dog.
Yes.
So yeah, in English, all you need to do in most cases is like add the S. Pluralization is super, super simple. But in Russian as well, you have 1, and I'll use the example of dogs again. The word dog, if there's 1 dog, is sabaka. If there's 2 dogs, it's sabaki. If there's 5 dogs, it's sabak. And so you have like a 1 and a few and a many kind of thing as well. And there's lots of languages that do that differently, where if it's between the numbers, 2 and 4, you might use a specific thing. If it's between the numbers 5 and 6, you might do something different. Like, and there's actually like charts you can find online, because this is specifically like in programming and in translation, they need to handle all of these different cases for different languages. And there's actually a lot of variability there.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And just hearing about all the different types of like number systems that are out there, and it's honestly quite surprising to me, just like as a linguist, that we've been able to get mathematics all on the same page. Like I can only imagine the like wild discourse within the global mathematics community trying to like come to terms with certain mathematical principles using similar verbiage and everything. I don't know enough about that. Maybe we should have gotten a mathematician on board. I don't know.
Yeah, no, so at one point I volunteered in Ecuador for a month teaching math at a couple schools in Quito. And I remember like even with specifically subtraction, long division, and a few other things, they just did it very differently than how I learned how to do it in school. And it 100% worked, and it was just as efficient, but I had to learn a new way of doing subtraction, a new way of doing long division in order to be able to help the kids in the way that they were used to performing it, which is very interesting for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I see stuff like all the time of like, this is like the Japanese way to do your like math, your like times tables or whatnot. And some people are like, oh, that's like so much easier. Like that's such a cool way of like conceptualizing things.
Right. Well, and even if you're just talking about how we count, let's spend a couple minutes talking about how that can differ between languages. Because like in English, when you have 1 through 9, those are like, or 0 through 9 are our basic numerals, right? And then when you get to 10, 11, it just like sounds very weird compared to everything else, right? And then 12, but then you get into more patterns of like, okay, 3-teen, 3-10, sort of 13, then 4-10, 14. Like it kind of makes sense how you get there. And then you have like 21, 22. In Chinese, it's even more systematic of a pattern in some ways, because they'll say like 110-1, 110-2 when they're counting. And then you have like in German, once you get to the number 20, instead of saying 21 or like 2-1, you say 1 and 20. And so you have differences like that in how languages just say their numbers and organize them.
Oh yeah, don't get me started on 99, which is the French word for 99, which is 80 plus 19.
Right. So they're using like a 20 base system and then
Yeah.
adding on it.
Yeah.
Uh,
So for us, they're like 9 and 9, and they're like, no, 80 plus 19.
right.
Which I think is really funny.
I had someone actually complaining the other day about like, in English, we have all of these numbers that make sense. 14 makes sense, 16 makes sense. Why
Mhm.
do we say 15 instead of 15?
Mhm.
And that is actually just a basic phonological rule.
Yeah.
The reason that you say 15 instead of 15 is because the T in 15 is an unvoiced consonant. So you're not like your
Oh,
vocal
you mean
cords.
the F. You mean the F. The bilabial the fricative.
No, no, no. I'm talking about the T. So the reason
Oh,
that
the
the
T?
V, yeah, the 15, when you have the
Oh.
T there, it's an unvoiced consonant. And because of that, you don't put a voiced consonant right next to it. Instead, you change the V, which is voiced, to be an F, which is
Yes.
unvoiced, so that the consonants match in their voicing.
Yes. Yes, 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 yes,
And
yes.
that's why you end up with that. And a lot of the other things, like when I talked about the word 11, I'm sure there is a historical reason that ties into also phonetics and phonology for why we say 11 instead
Instead
of
of
like
110.
110.
Yeah.
So it might seem super arbitrary, like if you haven't ever thought about how your mouth works and like how we came to get here. But for most of these things, there is like actually a rational, process in a way that was followed to get there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I like EJ and I were kind of talking about this a little bit off the pod too, but this is like things like numbers and like the more practical sides of like language people love to kind of like complain about and pick apart. And it's like totally understandable because if it's like a different system, it's like hard to learn. And then if there's like weird little exceptions like 11, like that's annoying for everybody. But like it's easy to complain about those things, but people often forget just how old language is and how like messy it is. People are like, why can't we just make things simple? And it's like, well, humans have never been simple. Like we've just keep things around, and like if it works, it works. And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
sometimes having those exceptions are like make things easier in a way. And I guess let me kind of expand on that. And I know we're going off on a little bit of a tangent, but this is just kind
Please.
of like
I
a
love the
general this
tangents.
is just like a general discussion of markedness. And that's kind of going back to what I mentioned before, is just this idea of like things being different.
Yeah. Could I just give like an example of markedness that
Yes, go
would
for it.
maybe stand out to people?
Yeah.
So, like a very, very normal phrase is ladies and gentlemen.
Yes.
And if you change that, and if you say gentlemen and ladies, suddenly that's like a very marked expression, like a very,
It stands out. You notice it. You're like, wait, that's not how that should be. Or like, this doesn't
Mhm,
follow the normal pattern that has been previously established.
exactly.
And so this idea of markedness comes up in syntax and phonology, all of this different stuff. And it's actually like a huge part of what makes language possible is the fact that there are exceptions to rules. Because I mean, the way that the world works, things follow like a pretty natural order. Patterns are definitely a thing. Gravity is somewhat of a constant in this world. Um,
Somewhat.
Look, some people fight you on it. I ain't gonna get in on that debate. I'm not a physicist. Um, some people will say, it's a law. Some people are like, nah, gravity is still like a weird thing that we don't fully understand. I don't know. Look, I'm not gonna go then that far. But what's really interesting about what makes language such like the perfect tool is the fact that we've been able to add these exceptions. Like the reason that people are able to like learn things is because we notice the differences and we're able to apply those differences and be like, okay, this is where something is similar, this is where something is different, this is what's like important to notice and then like apply. So
Mm.
it's a neurological concept that like not a lot of people outside of linguistics will necessarily be like, oh, that's a good thing. It's a good thing for things to break the rules, but it's literally the only way that like language has been able to get as far as it has gotten is because it's not a perfectly set pattern. It's because it's not like mathematically like the Fibonacci sequence or anything. It's because there's these like weird exceptions that we've been able to like grow as a species.
Well, and in a lot of ways, language matches humanity and matches
Yes.
culture and society, and humanity is messy.
Yeah.
So actually, whenever I am learning languages or thinking about language, I actually don't like thinking about these things as rules.
Mm-hmm.
Because most of the things that people call rules in language classes are not, universal constants. They're not unbreakable rules. I prefer generally thinking of them as patterns. And
Mm-hmm.
then you find patterns upon patterns, and you're able to build this really intricate puzzle, this web of meaning. And for me, that just makes a lot more sense than calling them rules, because very, very frequently I've had people explain things as rules that they don't make sense as
Yeah,
rules to
they're
me.
not like they're not hard and fast rules. They're just
Mm-hmm.
not. They're just not. And yeah, I 100% agree. Like it's just kind of how things work, but yeah, it's also just really interesting like if you think about how human language is expressed physically, whether that be through sign or through speech, we are able to distinguish things through like contrast. Like things have to sound different, things have to be different in order for us to notice them, right? And like that's just part of how our brains have been wired, is like, oh, when something is different you notice, and then that's like how you like learn things, and how patterns work for our brains. And so it just makes sense that like physiologically, you go from the like ba 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 to like pa 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 pa, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, something's different, and I noticed something, and that can kind of that like simple principle just expands. I feel like I'm not explaining myself super well, and
No,
I'm using
I
a
think
lot of
what you're saying makes sense. Like there's a lot of
yeah.
different ways that people learn language, but like the contrast between things can be a very important aspect of that.
It is what like language is essentially, is
Mm-hmm.
just
Right.
all of these different contrasts that come together.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, when we're talking about patterns of like language, or why something is so different, and it feels so easy to complain and be like, 11 is a dumb number because it doesn't follow the pattern. And it's like, yeah, you know that a lot of things don't follow patterns, and things aren't supposed to follow patterns, because if it followed a perfect pattern you probably wouldn't learn it, because that's not how your brain is wired. Like that's
Mm.
perfect patterns are not meant for people.
Right. And a lot of that also just comes from change with time. Like it's inevitable
Mm-hmm.
that things don't end up in a perfectly logical mathematical state.
Yeah.
That's just not how the world works in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And what is really interesting though is this idea of it's like language is inherently imperfect, right? Like it doesn't follow all of these like super strict patterns, but it does have some sort of patterning to it. And what's
mhm.
fascinating is a lot of people within the realm of linguistics, including myself, are interested in being like, okay, what is the like closest perfect pattern that language does match up to, and then how does it
Mhm.
differ and why? And like
Yeah.
that's like the one of the big goals of a lot of linguists out there, is like, we understand that like language is never going to be a perfect pattern, but like
Mm.
when we look at like the math and logic and we compare it to language, like how close are we getting? Like what is making it different? What is making it stand out? This is one
Right.
hell of a tangent that I just
Oh, I
took us
like it.
on.
See, I'm like the opposite. For me, I love the pragmatics, like the actual meaning and the way that people actually express themselves. So for me, the more interesting aspect of linguistics is where people veer away from the patterns and where people like almost rebel with their
Mhm.
language in doing something different from the norm,
Yeah.
which is super fun. But yeah, I don't think I really have much more to say about numbers right now. Is there anything you would like to come back to on that?
I don't think so. I think we took this in a very interesting direction. In discussing like markedness for a minute. I feel like we could go on a
Mhm.
whole other.
We
I
should.
I could talk about markedness for a while because markedness as a linguistic concept is, I mean, it's pivotal. Like once if we're talking about like the history of linguistics as a field of study, once like the topic of markedness came up, and it came up pretty early, we're not like, let's not beat around the bush, but once that subject came up, it was like, oh, like this is what makes language. This is what
Mm,
this is what is distinguishing it from other things that we're seeing in the human
right.
in our natural world, is this idea of like something's got to be different, something has to
Yeah.
be like a little bit weird, it can't be like this perfect pattern, it's gotta like fuck around a little bit, and that's kind of what makes it language, is this idea of markedness.
Well, let's do another episode on markedness sometime soon.
Yeah,
But
we can
yeah,
dive into it more. I'd love, we can go into like the history of who talked about markedness first, why, and what has been talked about it. I'd love to do some more. We can reference some fancy people and fancy papers in that
let's
episode.
do it. Let's
Yeah.
do it. All
But this,
right.
I guess
Well,
this is a good intro to markingness, and is like just like hey, number systems are weird, they're gonna be hard, and that's important. They're hard for
right.
a reason, they're different for a reason, but they're cool. Numbers are cool. Learn your math.
Right? Oh my gosh. This like math ad brought to you by For the Love of Language. Well, if you have any thoughts or comments, things you would like us to discuss, please let us know at For the Love of Language on Instagram, and we would love to hear from you. And please give us a rating or a review wherever you're listening to this, and we'll see you next
See you
time.
next time. Bye.